Hello and welcome to episode 382 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. I am one of the co-founders here at ETR, and today we have a very, very special guest. This is an actual, real live bookmaker. Don't think we've ever had one on before. He's running operations for Circa Sportsbook. It is, of course, Jeff Benson. Jeff, how's it going?
Good. I appreciate you having me on.
For sure, man. We have a ton to cover today about all things sports betting and being on either side of the counter. Before we get into that, I have to remind everyone this show is indeed brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy, undoubtedly the smoothest, highest stakes, best user experience for anyone trying to play best ball fantasy. This summer, use promo code ETR when you sign up for a $100 matching deposit bonus. And of course, you can upload our rankings directly onto Underdog if you desire. All right. Have a lot to get to here today, Jeff. I think let's start here. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton of people listening. They want to be in the sports betting business. They want to be with you on one side of the counter, or a lot of them want to be bettors. But let's talk about your side of the counter to start. How did it happen for you getting into the sports betting business?
Yeah, I think for me, always been into playing sports growing up, and then obviously in high school and college, kind of got into the betting of sports. Obviously, a big sports fan, watching sports growing up, but certainly having the experience of getting into sports betting. Having a local, a PPH, and I would say that was really my first experience. And then obviously once I graduated from college, this was back in 2012. At this point, sports wagering really wasn't legalized around the country. Obviously, PASPA hadn't been repealed. So for me, the only place I could go in a legal setting at that time was Las Vegas. So I moved out here right after college. Started for, I would say, the first 3 to 6 months when I got out here. I was just betting full time. And then ultimately I wanted to get on the other side of the counter, really, speed up my progression in terms of learning and understanding about the industry. And I think getting, on this side of the counter, really understanding, how operators operate, what they do, and just kind of learning from this side of the counter has certainly accelerated that for me. And been in the business, 11 years now. So started at station casinos as a ticket writer, at the ripe age of 22, worked my way up to a line supervisor. And then obviously, I've been over at Circa here for, 3.5 years in an operations and management role.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, everybody that I've heard who wants to start from scratch is like, hey, go be a ticket writer. And for those of you guys who don't know, ticket writer just means literally, if you ever bet in an actual casino, not online, you literally go up to someone and tell them what you want to bet. They put it into the computer, they hand you a ticket. I mean, it seems to me like that's, if you had no experience whatsoever, that's the best way to start if you can get one of those jobs, right?
Absolutely. I started that way. Matt Metcalf, who's our director, he started that way. Chris Bennett, who's our director of risk, he started that way. That's really how most people get it in the industry. You start as an entry level ticket writer, get to understand, what happens in the front of house. And then ultimately you can kind of work your way up into either, a front of house operations role, which is something, that I'm doing, or ultimately, obviously, I would say, most listeners on here would be targeting, kind of a risk-based role in the back of house.
Yep. Okay. Awesome. I think it would be useful for people to get a sense and understand where a line comes from, because there's a ton of people in fantasy who say generic things. Well, Vegas thinks this and Vegas has it at Y. Vegas thinks X, which tilts me a little bit because it like discredits originators and market makers somewhat, just to say, oh, this line just came out of thin air and now it's everywhere painted in Vegas the same. Let's say I don't know, NFL regular season side or an NFL regular season total. Maybe explain to people a little bit where that line comes from.
Yeah, I think a good starting point, for any line would be to look at one's power rankings numbers, and or their model. Chris Bennett, whom is our director of risk and primary manager of our NFL product, I would say he's adjusting his numbers on a daily and weekly basis, based on injuries, information, market sentiment, and then, how these teams are performing, over the course of a week, over the course of a month, etc. So I would say a simplification of this process would be, for example, last year, if you had the Chiefs as being 7 points better than the average team, and then the Falcons being 6 points worse than the average team, then in essence, on a neutral field, the Chiefs would be a 13-point favorite. If they were playing at either team's home stadium, I think you'd see some people would adjust between 1 and 3 points, for home field advantage. For what it's worth, I think home field is probably closer to 0 today than it is 3. But I would give the Chiefs, a bigger home field advantage than the Falcons at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Falcons come out and play a really close game and look good, and the Chiefs struggle a little bit, and are dealing with some injuries from the game, then you could see a downward power rating adjustment, from the Chiefs, and an upward power rating adjustment from the Falcons. And, obviously they're not going to play the next week, but, if they played the next week, maybe that game is now lined 11 instead of 13. So, I would say that's kind of painting with a broad brush. But I think that certainly maybe gives your listener a little bit of a glimpse into the simplification of the process. I think a lot of it, you alluded to, market makers, originators, I think at the end of the day, once you've gotten past these openers, the market is, the truest test of efficiency, particularly, at a Circa, a Pinnacle, a Chris, where the limits are going to be really, really high. But I would say, if you're trying to figure out how to make a line and what goes into making a line, you're going to have people with their power rankings, their numbers, and or their model. And then those people are going to be adjusting, based on what they're seeing on a week to week basis.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong here. I mean, this is my assumption. Like somebody opens, either Pinnacle or Chris or you guys or whoever. Someone has to put out the first NFL line, and then it starts to get bet around a little bit. And I understand limits aren't that high, Sunday, Monday, or whatever. But the line gets bet around to somewhat level of efficiency, and then it starts to get released to all these books that are basically copying that line that was originated. And that's how you get every book in the world within, a point or a half point or on the same number as each other. Do you think that's a fair way is my assumption that the correct way to think about it?
Absolutely. And like you said, I think it certainly discredits a lot of these market makers and originators. Obviously in today's world, it's a copycat game, and obviously you have less independent operators like a Circus Sports, etc. And so obviously when one shop opens, you're going to see the screen get painted, because a lot of these people, a lot of these shops aren't necessarily thinking, they're not market making, they're not originating, they're not putting up their own numbers. So I think from a consumer standpoint, when you looked at Vegas and maybe the early 2000s, you would have 5, 6, 7, 8 different true lines you could actually bet into, whereas nowadays, you look at the screen and if you see one shop that's half a point off, that's noteworthy. Whereas when you rewind 10, 15 years, you would have seen a lot more disparity and discrepancies within the market.
All right, let's get to what the book actually wants. There's so much, I think, confusion about this. I get asked this all the time. I think people have a lot of assumptions in their head. Does the book actually want to generate equal action on both sides, or are you guys looking to take a position on a game? Because I think the assumption out there is like, oh, the books will just get 50% of the action on the Eagles and 50% of the action on the Cowboys, and they'll just collect the juice. Easy game. But I don't know how practical that is. And I think people get confused on if you guys even want that. So how do you respond to people who want to know what you guys actually want in terms of action on both sides?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked this question. I think obviously, like you alluded to, I get asked this all the time, or you see people on Twitter, comment that this is exactly what the books are looking for. That couldn't be anything further from the truth. I guess that's dependent, on a shop per shop basis. But I would certainly say this is one of the biggest misnomers of the industry. I think many people wrongly think that you simply want to take 100K on both sides of a game and just simply collect the roughly 10K in juice and move on. However, that's really wrong. I think good bookmakers will utilize the sharp action to aggressively move and position themselves, on the side of the game that the sharps are betting. It's not always going to work out like that. But generically speaking, you want to go into the game needing the side that the sharps bet. So, for example, you take sharp money on the Celtics on the opener and leading up to post time. And you can, at that point, with the limits being lower, you can feel good about where your number is. And then obviously, when you're in the highest tier, in terms of limits, and you're taking the most amount of money, right before post or day of, then you can take a couple of limit bets from, recreationals, on the other side, and you can go into the game needing the sharp side for, 1, 2, 3 bets, whatever your limit is. And I think that's the situation, that we are looking for, as good bookmakers, because we ultimately want to utilize that sharp information, to help shape our line, to make it most efficient. And like I said, if you're not utilizing that information to put you on the side that the sharps need, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Obviously, when you look at a DraftKings, a FanDuel, a Barstool, maybe more of the soft book model, they probably aren't taking a lot of sharp bets. So I can't speak to whether they'd want equal action on both sides or not. But I think if you're, a market making shop or an originating shop, and you're able to utilize that sharp information and those bettors, to help, in a price discovery way, shape your line. Ultimately, you can go into the game, needing the side, that the sharps are on. Like I said, it's not always going to work out like that. But a lot of time, if you can go into these games, being a bet or two high, on the sharp side, and wanting to root for them, that ultimately is going to put you in a good position as a bookmaker.
Yeah, I noticed. I was looking at the screen ahead of, I think it was maybe game 2 or game 3 of the finals, and you guys had the highest total in the entire world on the game. I think it was like 214 and a half, and everyone else had 213, 213 and a half. And I was like, man, this is interesting for them to be so far off the world. Was this because you guys, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I was curious if this is because you guys wanted money on the under, or if the sharps that were betting there were betting over and therefore it got up that high. I mean, I guess what were you trying to say by being so far off market in such a big game like the NBA Finals?
Yeah, I would say absolutely that. Like I said, if we take sharp action from bettors that we respect and or we have an opinion, I think it would be a combination of both. We have no problem being off market. I think when maybe if you look at, us and say we have 214 and you look at, DraftKings that is 213, I mean, I would say that we have the more efficient number given what our limits on that specific market are going to be. So, for us, obviously, there's not too many shops that go off market. But for us, we feel comfortable with the number that we have on the board at all times. And we have no problem being off market if we think that's, the correct place to be.
Yeah, I mean, my first instinct was like, oh man, this is like the best line in the world. I got to bet it. And then I thought, well, these guys know what they're doing. There's a reason they are off market, have the best line in the world. So I decided to pass. And yeah, I don't even know what the result was, but yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Okay. I know you guys move lines on sharp action or what you deem to be sharp action. I do want to get to that later. But while we're talking about lines more generally, I want to ask about moving a line because I've always thought, hey, when you move a line too much, you open yourself up to getting middled. So if every time a sharp comes in and bets you guys, you move the line, well, you could open Eagles 2.5. If it closes Eagles 3.5 and it lands 3, well, you've got a real big problem on your hands because both sides of the bet are going to win depending on when people got it. And there's going to be some pushes in there too. In other words, you guys are going to get middled. So how do you think about moving a line aggressively when you get sharp action, also not getting middled?
Yeah, I would say the concept of getting middled is overblown in my opinion. I think when you're in price discovery mode early, like we are as a market making and originating book, you're constantly going to be moving your numbers to find information and to take bets so you can get to the right number as quickly as possible, where then, later in the week or closer to post time, you can take the bulk of your money at much higher limits. So obviously, injuries aside, I would say the range and distribution of numbers you're moving through certainly lessens as you get closer to the event, which, like I said, correlates to those limits also, increasing. So, we may open something 5, and by game time, we may be at 8, but the bets we took on the openers, from a limit perspective, are going to be paltry compared to the limits at post. So, you really aren't going to get middled for a ton in that scenario, which I don't think people understand. They may look at, where you open versus where you close, but I think it's more important to look at where, you took the bulk of the money at what numbers, so you may open at 5 and close at 8, but the amount of money that you took, or the bulk of it, may be, bettors laying 7.5 and taking back 8. So, a lot of those early numbers weren't as impactful because the limits weren't as high. And also the moves are going to be more aggressive on the open. You may open 5, on a college basketball game, on an overnight, and your first bet may be from a sharp, and you may go, 5 to 6.5, but day of, like I said, injuries aside, you're probably, not going to make, a 1.5 point move on a bet. It's going to be a much smaller, range and distribution of numbers you're moving through, because the market is getting more efficient, the closer you get to post time. So, I would say, like I said, in that scenario, if you're doing price discovery the correct way, you're not going to get middled for a ton. And I think when you kind of peel back the layers and you understand where you took the bets, it's maybe not as impactful on the surface as, some of these bettors, think about, a line move 3 points, but, really, where did you take the bet? So, our sportsbook director, Matt Metcalf, he said it best, in reference to his college football moves. Obviously, we're the first, opener in the world when it comes to college football, and the possibility of getting middled versus, other shops that are straight copying the line moves. His response was, the problem is by the time the number has settled, and by the time the number has settled in terms of, opening, and it's been copied, the opening book has all the information, while the copying books are starting from scratch. And we can afford to get middled because we paid for the information at a much lower price, while the copiers are still in price discovery mode the whole way. So, I thought that kind of, encapsulated your question, really, really well. And I think when you look at the price discovery, that some shops are doing versus other shops, and who's copying and who's not copying, I think, we don't have as much danger in terms of moving lines and getting middled, because we're utilizing the information correctly, whereas maybe some other shops aren't.
I want to ask about moving lines. Obviously, as you said early in the week, if Sharp comes in and bets you guys, you're going to move on action. Do you ever move the line if, say, a recreational player bets a lot, even if it's early in the week or something like that? Let's just say you get a lot of money on a side. You don't know, or you don't think it's necessarily Sharp money. Do you move a line for that also?
Yeah, I would say obviously you're moving a line, definitely more so, when a, sharp player is betting it versus, when a recreational player is betting it. But there's certainly a world where, in a more niche market, or a market that doesn't have, as high limits, if you take a big bet that maybe, 2, 3, 4x what the standard limit is, you definitely may certainly move it, in that scenario, just because of the amount of money and not necessarily who's betting it. But I think when you factor in a lot of that stuff, if you're taking, 10 dimes on a baseball game, and you take, 50,000, from, a house player, or, a casino player or something like that, the thing you don't want is, if you move the number and then, you instantly get bet, back from a sharp the other way. So certainly, I would say the majority of moves, are coming from somebody that we respect, or, a player who is getting a lot of closing line value, or somebody we think who has an edge. But I would certainly say there's, times, the Super Bowl, for example, where the amount of money that is being wagered from a non-recreational or a non-winning player would definitely move the market at times.
Interesting. Okay. I know. I'm interrupting the video. Wah. But if you're enjoying this video and want to see more fantasy football and DFS content like it, please just take 2 seconds, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. Really does go a long way for us, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching. And now back to the show. I guess before we get into the business model stuff, I should ask, people are probably wondering, how do you identify who a sharp is? I understand, for most people, I think that most books have some model where they're seeing how often customers are beating the closing line. And that's can definitely work in major markets. I think in some other markets, which I can talk about a little bit later, like, hey, you could move the line and you could be getting closing value just because books are moving because of your action, not necessarily because the closing line has value. But anyways, how do you go about identifying a player as sharp or square or whatever, if you can answer that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, closing line value is going to be something that's, particularly important for those listeners who don't understand what closing line value is. If you're laying 2 on a game, and the line closes 3.5, you got 1.5 points of closing line value. You lay, minus 15 on a baseball game and it closes minus 130, you got 15 cents of closing line value. So, obviously, we're looking to see, what players are getting closing line value, relative to the markets they're betting. We're looking at whether a player is, a winning long-term player or a losing long-term player based on the percent we're holding on them or the percent they're holding on us. So I would say, those are really, two of the most important things that go into that.
Okay. Before we get any further, we have to talk about business models because you've already alluded to it a bunch, and I think it's the elephant in the room. So you can correct me if I'm wrong. You guys, I believe, have posted limits, which are pretty big for all markets that you offer. Everyone gets at least those limits. No one gets limited. No one gets limited for winning. No one gets limited for beating the closing line. No one gets kicked out. This is a very unique model in the USA. I think people would ask the question, hey, wouldn't it be better from a business perspective? Obviously, for players, and we can talk about that, it's awful. But from a business perspective, wouldn't it be better to not have winning players and just take all the action in the world from all these wrecks who are just there to have fun? Why go with this model where you don't limit anyone and you don't kick anyone out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like when you look at last night's NBA Finals game, we were taking 100,000 on the side, 30,000 on the total, and 50,000 on the money line from anybody in the world. For us, we believe in being ethical, being transparent, and providing a free and fair marketplace, for all players, to play. I think obviously that's not something that's widely accepted in the industry because a lot of these shops are, big conglomerate corporations. They have CEOs and brand ambassadors, who've never made a bet and, who don't really understand how the industry works. For us, obviously, we believe in a low hold, high volume model. And whether you're Circa Sports and holding 3%, or whether you're a DraftKings and a FanDuel holding, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10%. I think either way, you're in a low hold business. And when you're in a low hold business, you should be doing everything in your power to incentivize, writing bets and increasing your volume. And I think a lot of those shops, certainly aren't doing that. They're obviously limiting, maybe the non-recreational or the sharp player. And quite frankly, they're also probably, limiting, good recreational players or people who are going to be long-term losers, over the course of, their lifetime, just because they run into, 2% CLV on their first, 4 bets or something like that. So, obviously for us, we're guys who bet, we just try to put ourselves, in the position of players and, we also think it's the most profitable model. Obviously, it's it's not the low hanging fruit in the industry. But we believe in the long run, that if we can write, all the recreational and non-recreational money, and just have as much volume as possible, that everything's going to work out over time. I would say, obviously, we're private. We're not, we don't have shareholders to answer to and things like that. So I think from that perspective, having a CEO and an owner like Derek Stevens, who understands variance, who understands the industry, who's gambled before. I would say that's certainly a helpful thing. But from a player perspective, the soft book model, isn't the model that I enjoy playing into.
Right.
You see the $18.98 screenshots from these players over and over and over, and I think it's just kind of a not a great experience for the customer. So that's kind of putting it lightly. But it would be nice to certainly see more people have the Circa, the Pinnacle, the Chris business model, and take on all comers. And I think maybe the counterpoint is there's a lot of people who do this for entertainment, which is all well and good. But I think DraftKings and FanDuel kind of stand on this leg that they have the biggest menu in the world, but when guys like yourself and other non-recreational players can't get down more than $100 on some of these props and some of these markets, to me it doesn't amount to a lot. You can say that you have a much bigger prop menu than we do, but if you don't take a fair bet to it, really it just amounts to sports betting for decoration or kind of window dressing for me. So that would be kind of what I would say is the argument versus the soft book versus the sharp book model. But we really believe that in the long run, we're going to continue to add to our menu. We're going to continue to build on what we're doing, and if we can take on all comers and write as much volume as possible in the long run, we strongly believe that this model will win out.
So I think what I understand though, you need recreational players to bet, right? Because you can't just have only sharps in the book, because sharps aren't going to bet on the Sundays. So after you've had price discovery, you're not going to get sharps coming in on Sunday morning of the game and placing limit bets, I don't think. So you're still relying on getting recreational action. You need action late once you have the price discovery. And I guess from what I can tell, you need a lot of it, right? And I guess what DraftKings and FanDuel and et cetera would say is, hey, props, single game parlays, these whole like turn a little bit of money into a lot type offerings, even if there's almost no chance that people actually are successful doing so. That's what brings in recreational money. So is that a fair thing to say, that, hey, you guys still need to find recreational action to balance out the sharp action you're getting?
Absolutely. I think, to your point, there's going to be sharps and there's going to be non-recreational, there's going to be sharps and there's going to be recreational players, in the Circa Sports marketplace. I think, the limits that we take, attract both sharp and recreational players. And obviously, we continue to build our menu each and every day, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of a, obviously in any ecosystem, you're gonna have people who win and you're gonna have people who lose, and we certainly understand that. But I would say, as good bookmakers, utilizing that sharp action to get you to the right number is going to be so impactful in the long run. And I think, in any low hold business, obviously volume is going to be your best friend. So for us, we don't believe in kicking out people, limiting people, things like that. We believe in utilizing their information, to make our line more efficient. And I think by doing that, then we can take maybe bigger recreational bets, than some of these other shops are.
Yeah, for sure. The biggest thing for me is, I'm kind of on the side of, it's a private business, or, DraftKings and FanDuel and MGM and PointsBet and Fox or whatever else. They can run their business, however they want. They want to limit, us for betting props or betting USFL or betting WNBA or making withdrawals or whatever, that's their right. The part that actually irks me the most is, the marketing. Like, the marketing is like un-American. It's almost like, hey, come and win come get a chance to win all this money. But everybody knows if you win, you're actually done. You know what I mean? They're actually not going to let you bet. So, I don't mind like steering people to books like that because they're offering outrageous sign up bonuses. You can beat them for, a week or 2 weeks or a month or 6 months or whatever and take your money and be done, and so I don't know, like I totally get both sides of it. It's just the marketing that really bothers me
Yeah,
the
I mean,
most.
what I would say to that is, yeah, I agree with you 100%. I don't, obviously each business can do what they want. I think there's, people who enjoy each model. I would just say all people are asking is just be transparent. So I think obviously when you have, these CEOs and these brand ambassadors come out and say, we don't want, people who are doing this for profit. I think that just kind of spits in the face of your consumer. But to further on to your point, if these, I don't, when I say I don't care, I really do. But if you came out and just said that we had $100 limits on props and you were transparent about it and you let yourself or any other bettor, who is playing there, bet those limits, all people are asking for is transparency. People don't want to go up to the window and get $300 on props one day and then get $3 the next day. I think from a consumer experience, that's really poor. So I think bettors are just asking for transparency and consistency. And obviously I would never, obviously I'm not advocating for, shops, taking $100 on props, but I would have so much more respect for these shops if they just came out and said what their limits were on each specific market. And I think when you come out and you're transparent about your limits, what you're doing is, in essence, you're telling your bettors how much you're valuing them in terms of their time and information by what you're willing to pay them in terms of the limits that you're giving them. So, like I said, while I'd never advocate for giving $100 prop limits, at the very least, if these operators were transparent and said what they were going to give these players, I think at the very least it would make for a much better experience.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And yeah, that would be incredible just to know, and transparency. I totally agree with you there. I do want to say, like, me and you and a lot of people on Twitter and a lot of people listening to this, like, sometimes we lose sight, and I do too, that like we're in this bubble where the big picture is 95% of people are literally just betting to have fun. Like they have no interest whatsoever or no like hardcore desire to put in work to win. All my neighbors, all my friends, basically all they want to do is, bet $20 on Warriors and over, and just watch the game and have fun. And that's why I think some of these soft book models are going to end up working because like they don't care that the transparency is there, that the juice in some of these one-way markets is outrageous. Like they just don't care. They just want to bet and have fun. And so they're going to hold 9% on these people or 10% at a huge amount of volume. And that's why the business model gets like implemented so much, because we scream a lot in the bubble, and obviously it really pisses me off too. But there's a lot of people out there who just want to have fun, and so I don't know. I just didn't want to like overlook those people too, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean.
absolutely. I certainly think there's, a world for both business models to operate. Obviously being on the sharp book side, and you being, a non-recreational gambler and not necessarily doing it for entertainment and more or less doing it for profit. I believe there's, a world where both can operate. I just think the current world we're in, the soft books say that that's the only model that can be operated. And I think that's maybe what the frustrating part is.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And having you guys and having a place for both, undoubtedly is awesome. Got a question from Top Fantasy Player was his name on Twitter. He says, if we have been limited by most legal books for consistently beating closing line value, should we be mixing in some long shot parlays, et cetera, to throw off the scent that we're sharp? Yeah, we've dealt with this, a ton with props. Does it make a difference if I go in there and we're winning a ton on props, but I also give them action on a 10 team Sunday favorites and over parlay? Can that help disguise our action at all?
Yeah, I would say it's, certainly a fascinating question for sure. There are probably plenty of people more qualified to speak on keeping accounts open at recreational books than I. because people getting CLV at Circa Sports doesn't matter to us in the sense that we won't limit people and or ever shut their accounts down for winning. But with that being said, most books don't like steam chasers, they don't like arbors, etc. So if you're doing that, I'd certainly steer clear of that if possible. People are more than welcome to steam chase an arb with us instead. But I'd say that doing some type of round robin parlays, with the individual legs of things, that you like or you believe you have an edge on, can throw books off the scent at times. But at the end of the day, if these recreational shops want to collar you, they're certainly gonna, do so. And, but you can probably be selective about the things you do on each, account and, how you spread your action, and things like that. And, maybe, when Raz releases a play, you're not jamming that, into some of these soft book accounts and things like that. I would say by doing some of those things, maybe you can help keep your, account afloat a little bit longer. But, it's certainly kind of, a losing battle in the sense that, you bet 3, 4, 5, 6 props, you're a winning better. And obviously, these books, can quickly chop you. So I would say, you can certainly do some things, some of the nuanced things, like I mentioned. Obviously, a guy, Alua Festal at Bet Bash was talking about it a little bit, but, doing round robin parlays, whether 2s, 3s, 4s, with individual legs that, you believe you have edge on, is certainly something that I think can help. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're betting more of the niche markets, first quarters, first halves, WNBA, college basketball totals, and a lot of these props, obviously, it's going to be very hard for your account to continue to get the limits that you got at the beginning, and or outright not be closed.
Yeah, the funny thing is, like, I have no edge whatsoever in sides and totals or anything like that, and I know that. But sometimes I'm just sitting around and a game comes on and I want to watch, and like I just want to bet a side just for fun. I have no edge whatsoever. I literally just want to sit there and bet a side for fun, and like I can't even do that. So like they're losing my action by not letting me even do that. And I think that's some of the stuff that you're saying. So yeah, I mean,
Well, yeah, to your point, and I think it's a point that's not talked about enough. Let's say you have just a random guy who signs up for, a DraftKings account, and, he the first bet he makes is the, is the Celtics -4, and whoever they're playing, 3 hours later, their second leading scorer, has COVID, and the line ends up closing 7. They're going to look at him and say, he knew the other guy had COVID. He got 3 points of closing line value, put him in a non-recreational bucket and limit him. And they don't even get to see over a long enough sample size, whether this individual has any edge, whether this individual is going to continue to get closing line value, etc. So I would say, there's going to be people who run into, artificial CLV or run into an injury or information news, and they just get collared or quickly cut down, when they're not even a winning better in the long run.
Yeah. I want to get off this topic. But the last thing I want to ask about was you mentioned steam chasing and arbing. I don't think that many people maybe, or some people don't know what steam chasing means. I would define it as just when prices lag behind or when something is off market. For example, if it's Eagles -4 everywhere, but MGM has a 3.5, well, you go and you bet Eagles 3.5 there, and that's essentially steam chasing. And or it would be, kind of identifying which books are sharp at which sports. You think, Circa for NFL or Bookmaker for tennis or whatever it is. You see what they move to, and as soon as they move, other books are going to lag behind. They're not moving as fast because they're just copying lines, and you go ahead and you get ahead of that, aka steam chase. Is that how you define steam chasing, and is that moral / okay for people to do?
Yeah, I mean, just cleaning the board, just picking off the best numbers. Obviously there's certain places, that don't like that. Obviously, the soft book probably don't care for that. Here at Circa Sports, people are more than welcome to board clean. They're more than welcome to steam chase. I think the arbing discussion's, an even bigger one, because, I'll give an example that happened to me last year in the NFL. obviously when there was a lot of COVID. NFL Week 17, it may have been 2 years ago, actually, with a lot of COVID. Ryan Fitzpatrick was the starter for the Dolphins, and I ended up taking +4 in Week 17 for a nickel on the opener because I thought the Bills were possibly going to be sitting some of their starters, and I thought that the line was going to close lower. It ended up getting bet down to like 1.5, and then ultimately, it came out that Ryan Fitzpatrick had COVID, and at that time, Tua was going to come in and be the replacement. And I thought at that time Tua was a drop off from Ryan Fitzpatrick, so I ended up just buying out of my position, and I laid 1.5 at the same shop. And they ended up closing my account and saying if you ever bet both sides of the same game, you'll no longer be welcomed here. And to me, it just if you have a number on the board, anybody should be able to bet it, even if it's the same account. So I think arbing is something that a lot of these shops, if you lay 2 and then later in the week you take back +4, things like that, those are things, that a lot of these, recreational shops really don't like. And it's something that can certainly, put the red flag on your account. So for us, if people, if somebody lays 2 and we go to 2.5 and they want to lay 2.5 again, we feel comfortable with the number that we put on our board, and we have no problem writing a bet at 2.5. If they lay 2.5 and we go 3 and they want to lay 3 again, more power to them. If we have a number on the board, anybody is able to bet it, and we have people who, will come in and they'll lay 2 and then we go to 3 and they'll take back 3 immediately. Like I said, it's strictly a volume game for us. We just want to, when we opened our doors, and applied for our license, everything was about taking bets, and anything that we have on our board, we feel comfortable with that number and anyone's able to bet it. So, I would say that's kind of, what our response to steam chasing and board cleaning and arbing is. But it's certainly something that's, not well received in the industry at a lot of other shops.
All right. I can't believe we've talked this long and we haven't even gotten to the topic that matters to me, or the really only topic that matters to me is props. I guess first question on props is Circa is not offering props as far as I've seen. When I say props, I mean player props, NFL, NBA. How come no player props at Circa?
So we do player props. It's just going to be at a lesser amount than what you're going to see at a DraftKings or FanDuel. Obviously on an NBA, regular season day of, you're obviously going to have a wide and vast array of props, at DraftKings or a FanDuel, which is something at this time we can't offer. Obviously, for the NBA, finals and the playoffs, we're offering, quite a few props. Obviously, the menu isn't as expansive, like I said, as a DraftKings or a FanDuel. But for us, obviously, we're working to automate more things. We're working to build our menu. And ultimately, the goal in the long run would be to have, a prop menu that obviously, may not totally compare apples to apples. We would ideally obviously like to offer more props than what we're offering right now. But I think obviously when you look at, the prop market, for us, like I said, we're working on a lot of automation and things like that. Obviously you can price props, but then there's also the, you have to book them as well. And, I think for us, our model and what we do is taking a fair bet to anything we put on the menu. And we could certainly put more props on the menu, but we don't want to take, $100 or $200 limits. That just doesn't fall in line with our brand at the current time. Yeah. So I would say for, like a Sunday night, a Monday night, a Thursday night football game, we'll have probably 20 or 30, individual player props. When we open, we'll take a dime. And then obviously when we get to, to game day, we'll take 2K limits. So I would say for the things that we put on the board, if you're, betting props with Circa Sports, you're going to be able to get a fair limit to. Obviously, we're not going to be able to match the expansiveness of the menu, of a DraftKings or FanDuel, but we just try to balance, the props that we do put on the board, being able to book them at a high level and give our players a really, really fair bet, versus obviously having, hundreds of props, and being able to offer a small limit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't realize you guys did that. And yeah, I'll certainly be in there in the fall. I mean, I'm just like I can say with almost 100% certainty that like we are going to win on player props, and not because we're geniuses or anything like that, but these books are putting up 500,000, 2,000 props a week, and we're betting 10 or 20 of them. It's just so much service area to defend, and we're trying so hard on this. Of course, we're going to win, but it sounds like similar to booking sides that you guys would be okay with that with certain people, or probably a large amount of people actually in props. I mean, really winning a lot. Like, do you have to hold in every market, or could props be some kind of loss leader for you guys?
Props can absolutely be a loss leader. Like I said, bettors, who win in major markets or niche markets, that doesn't matter to us. And ultimately, if you're betting into us, and we're giving you a 1K or 2K limit, that is what we feel like from a paying you perspective, that's how we, value your information and your time. And then ultimately utilizing your information, to be able, you bet, over 85.5, on a running backs, total, rushing yards for a game, maybe your bet, we're going to move much harder than, somebody else, given that we know you're a winning better in the prop market. And then, the hope would be that we could, write back a lot of, your bet on the other side, and hope to earn to that bet. So that's kind of how I would respond to it. But, like I said, we want to continue to build, on our prop menu in all sports, particularly in the regular season, not just the postseason. But, for us, if props are a loss leader, that's okay. But utilizing the information that, the bettors are giving us, can certainly help put us into a better position, like I've alluded to earlier. But like you mentioned, when you have, 100, 200, 300, 400 props on the board, that's a massive surface area. And obviously you guys are going to be able to find discrepancies and edges, in the market. But currently for us, our brand doesn't align with putting, that number of props on the board and taking a very, very small limit relative to other markets.
We got a question from Clint. He said, why doesn't Circa just pay ETR to make their NFL prop lines? Yeah, Jeff, we need money. Why don't you guys, for a low price of $10 million, we will set your NFL player prop lines for you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we when we put things on the board, I think, as guys who have, bet ourselves, being able to, fairly incentivize, our bettors, I think when you log into an app and somebody's giving you a $25 limit, that's telling you that they don't really care about the information that you're providing. And obviously you guys are providing fantastic information, and being able to offer fair limits on our props, that incentivizes you to give us that information, and hopefully be able to earn to it, is something we, strongly believe in.
To be clear, I'm joking, because I'm not sure that we would even want to do that for a book, because man, like right now, I'll wake up, or I'll look at when the openers come out, or I'll look at night, and I'll see where the discrepancies are between our projections and the lines, and if I want to make any bets. When you have responsibility to have 1,000 prop numbers out there, and it only takes 1 or 5 for you to get absolutely crushed, like that sounds really stressful. I mean, that sounds like, I would have a heart attack just at all times. I couldn't even sleep knowing that there could be information out there, and there's one line out there that we have off. So it's just, I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's much easier to be a bettor than it is taking bets, especially when you're talking about props and all this like kind of small information. Because even if like, a really good wide receiver gets scratched or whatever in the NFL, that's only like a half point move or a point move at most. Props, obviously, it's going to be a huge, huge, huge difference. So I don't know. I'm not looking for sleepless nights, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, to your point, I think it's massively important to have, an understanding of what players are worth to a side and total, so that you can kind of adjust quickly and on the fly, when injuries and information, break. And, to your point, a starting running back gets announced out in warmups. Well, what is that worth to the side and total? But to your point, well, how does his distribution of runs and catches get dispersed to the backup running back, and so on down the line? And how do all those, derivatives and prop markets, react? And obviously, when you're a bettor, you get to pick and choose what you can bet. And obviously when you're a bookmaker, you gotta throw everything on the board. So, I think those are, great examples, like you alluded to, where skilled bettors can get really great bets, and, maybe where the bookmaker's not put in the best position.
We got to get to listener questions here. So just quickly on live betting. I've read these stats from Europe that say live betting is some outrageous part, like some massive part of their overall handle, to the point where like I almost can't believe it that live betting is such a big part of their handle. I guess it's a little hard for me to see that happening here because pregame is so ingrained in people, but I could easily be wrong. What have you seen on live betting?
Yeah, I would say we're trending more towards a this isn't circus specific. I would say this is industry specific. I would say we're trending more towards a 50-50 split of pregame versus live. I think obviously, with the different live products, that are coming online, and with people, going to the game, watching the game and wanting to, feel active and a part of it. They may not have bet something pregame, but they're certainly going to, take some action, once they've watched a game and they get a little bit of feel for how things are playing out and things like that. So I don't ultimately think, live wagering is going to be bigger in the long run. But I certainly think, live wagering will continue to grow. Obviously, as you get rid of the spooling and the delays and things like that, and the experience is better for the customer. I certainly see a world where, maybe it's 50-50 pregame versus live, but
Yeah.
live is very, very popular. But I still think it's pretty early in terms of the live game when you think about, the delays, and things like that maybe make it not the best experience for the consumer.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's get to these listener questions. First one comes from Ohio Mike. He says, please talk through the process of creating a line with a key player being extremely questionable to play. And maybe, talk about this as an example. I mean, I was looking to bet some Browns stuff, and nobody in the entire world had Browns futures up, i.e., win total, yes, no, on making the playoffs, except for you guys had Browns stuff up, and I was able to bet it. How do you think about making a line when someone's extremely questionable play? And I have no idea if Deshaun Watson is going to play or not this year. At this point, I think it's probably greater than 50%. He's suspended for a long period of time, but I really have no idea. How do you go about creating a line, a future, anything like that with someone who's really questionable?
Yeah, I'll give you a good recent example from a couple of days ago. This is more of a game line than a future line. But game 2 of the college baseball super regional between Oregon State and Auburn, Cooper Hjerpe, he's the best pitcher in college baseball. I believe he was the Golden Spikes award winner. He was scratched from game 1 with an illness, and he was scheduled to pitch game 2, but nothing was official yet. And his, injury or his illness, why he was scratched from game 1 wasn't known exactly. So when Jeff Davis, our sportsbook manager, hung the line, we opened -170 on Oregon State with a total of 11 and a half flat. In essence, we kind of straddled the midpoint of the number we thought it would be if he was in versus if he was out. Obviously, throughout the course of the day, the market will kind of give you clues if the market believes the player is going to be in or if they're going to be out. And then ultimately what you're trying to do as odds makers and bookmakers is you're trying to quantify the percentage of whether, you believe the player is going to play or not. So if you believe it to be 50-50, then you're probably going to hang a number and straddle closer to the midpoint. Whereas if you think the player is 75% to play, then you're most likely going to be, much closer to the high end,
Mm-hmm.
So I would say kind of in this scenario, Cooper, and he did end up starting. And obviously, once the news came out, we went high end of the market around -220. It ultimately ended up closing higher. But we kind of, when making that number, Jeff had what the number was if Cooper was out, which was, probably 30, 40, 50 cents lower on the money line. And then obviously, probably 40 or 50 cents higher on the money line if he was in. And if we believed it to be 50-50, obviously straddling that midpoint, was something that worked for us. But obviously when he was ruled in, we moved the total down a full run and adjusted the run line proportionally. So I would say in a lot of cases, you're bannering the two numbers that you have the game at with him versus without him, and trying your best to ultimately quantify the percentage the individual is going to play and to help you get to the best number possible. And obviously, like you alluded to with your Browns bet, obviously with indictment number 24 and 25, and the public perception behind the Deshaun Watson narrative. Obviously, I agree with you. I think there's probably a greater than 50% chance that he doesn't play. And I think when you've looked at the market, you've certainly seen this anti-Brown sentiment in terms of the division and the win total and things like that. And in your mind, you're figuring out, what, is Baker Mayfield going to come back and be the starting quarterback for the Cleveland Browns? What is he worth to that number? And if, Baker Mayfield is ultimately traded or he doesn't come back and Watson suspended, what do you view Jacoby Brissett as in terms of a starter, both to, the line, the futures, the division and things like that. And obviously if, Watson's not playing for the Browns, then you probably bumping up the Ravens numbers and the Bengals numbers. And there's all this different tinkering. So, I think understanding and quantifying, what a player is worth and how it affects, these game and total and future markets is massively important. And, like you said, you can find a lot of value with it.
Yeah, for sure. Super interesting. Next question from friend of the show, one of the best friends of the show, Anthony Amico Crusher. He says, is Circa trying to get into the New Jersey market? Obviously, Anthony lives in Amico. Amico lives in New Jersey. He's asking this for selfish questions. He says, is Circa trying to get into the New Jersey market? And if so, is there a timeline where this may happen? Yeah, I think people don't realize how hard it is to get into all the states. I know it's wildly expensive. I'm spoiled here in Colorado, where I think they've made it relatively inexpensive and kind of the regulations are low. And so we have so many books here. But yeah, how hard is it to get into all the states, and any timeline for New Jersey for Anthony?
Yeah, so for those listeners who don't know, Circus Sports operates brick and mortar and retail in Nevada. We operate mobily in both Iowa and Colorado. And then obviously later this year in Q4, we will be operating both brick and mortar and online in Illinois. So those will be the 4 states we're currently in. You alluded to it, market access and getting into these other states, massive challenge. Obviously, particularly for smaller operators like ourselves. Obviously, when you look at, when Texas or California come online, what is expected from an operator in terms of the amount of states they're already operating in. And then obviously, what the market access fee they're going to have to pay is. So barriers to entry, I would say are pretty high. Obviously, when you look at a Colorado, for example, there's very favorable rules and regulations in terms of, remote funding and remote registration, meaning that you can go on, our mobile app anywhere in the state of Colorado. You can sign up for the mobile app and you can deposit, and that can be done all within 5 minutes. So for us, we're obviously looking at states that have favorable remote funding and remote registration rules and regulations. And then obviously, states that have, favorable market access fees. So New Jersey is definitely a competitive market, one that I think, a sharp book could certainly do well in. We've explored some expansion opportunities in New Jersey, but nothing final yet. But, as I tell everybody on Twitter, we are aggressive in our expansion efforts, on a national scale. And, the hope is that we're able to bring sports betting the way it should be, to all in this great country.
Next question is from Nick. He says, roughly, what % of players beat NFL spreads at mid or higher stakes? And he's asking about, minimum bet around $1,000. He says around 5 to 10% is his rough estimate. I don't know if you can or want to answer this, but, a lot of the assumption that fantasy people make is that the team totals, the implied team totals, are pretty efficient because NFL lines are so efficient. And my assumption is that by the time, I don't know, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and certainly Sunday comes, that NFL side is one of the most efficient markets that you will find in not only sports, but really anywhere. So I don't know if you agree with that or what % of players are beating NFL spreads that are betting at least $1,000.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what you said. 5 to 10% seems awfully high in my opinion.
Yeah.
The NFL is the most efficient market in the world. So I would certainly say there are less people that are going to be beating that at mid to higher stakes than, say, the NBA, the MLB, the NHL market, for example. I would disagree with others who say that you can't beat the NFL. I think if you're betting early in the week, you can certainly find some edges and get CLV. And obviously, if you're on top of injuries and things like that, you can certainly do well. But I would say betting into 100K limits an hour before post, on the other hand, on Sunday, is certainly going to be a much, much harder market to beat.
For sure. Next question is from Chris. He says, is there any work-life balance in a job like yours, or is it just foot on the gas every day? And I actually have a follow-up on that. I always wonder, and obviously I'm not asking you to reveal like how you guys are compensated, but I always wonder how hard people behind the counter are sweating. In other words, I know Rufus had some big outrights against you guys that almost hit. I mean, are you guys actually actively out there sweating this stuff because it's so closely tied to your compensation? And what's the work-life balance like in a job like this?
Yeah, I mean, sweating, I don't know, that's probably a strong word. Obviously we're rooting, to do well, on the markets that we're putting up, and obviously on the bets we're taking. Obviously when you take a 7-figure bet on the Super Bowl and things like that, obviously there's going to be a certain sweat there. But yeah, I would say, from that perspective, we understand variance. We understand we're going to have winning months. We understand we're going to have losing months. And I would say maybe at other shops, the sweat is going to be greater because, they want to look at a, smooth glide path in terms of, theoretical hold, on what a P&L looks like. And obviously they have, corporate shareholders and things they got to answer to. So I would say we certainly, sweat, the big decisions we have. But we're also very understanding of the variance in this industry, and certain days are good and certain days are bad. But in terms of a work-life balance, in this job and in the casino industry as a whole, obviously, I would say it's really foot on the gas every day. Obviously there's a sporting event every day. There's different seasons, obviously. And, once we get through NBA finals and, the Stanley Cup finals, you'll have a little bit of a breather here with, just golf, NASCAR and baseball. But I would say really foot on the gas every day. There's always something to do, even in the summer. You're working on, college football, win totals and power ratings, and, getting ready for the NFL. And, you're always getting ready for the next season, and there's future markets and win totals, and there's always something to get up. So there's really never an off day in the sports betting business, because injuries and information and things like that are happening every day, and you never know what edges you're going to run into. So I would say it's usually full bore ahead, no holidays in this business. And, if whether you're on this side of the counter or, whether you're on that side of the counter and you're creating content and betting for a living, this isn't really an industry where you're working 40 hours a week. And if you are working 40 hours a week, you're probably not maximizing your edges to the fullest degree.
For sure. 2 more questions here from Michael. He says, do you let runners sit in your book all day and let them bet? For those guys that don't know, runner just means, there's someone who's originating or wants to get action down, and they essentially hire people to go bet for them in a bunch of books all around the world. Do you let runners sit in your book all day and let them bet?
Yes, absolutely. We do. The one caveat I would say to that is obviously with the digitalization of where we're headed, I would say long gone are the days of, being on the strip and, or being in downtown Las Vegas and running from book to book to book, picking off numbers. I think with the mobile app proliferation, and the way the screen moves and things like that, that's just not, something that happens at a high enough clip anymore. So for us, we've really tried to make it as easy as possible on our players to have access at all times. So when I say that, what I mean is, here in Nevada, I talked about, the NBA limits we were taking yesterday for the finals, which was 100,000 on the side, 30,000 on the total, and 50,000 on the money line. We were taking those limits both at the counter and on the mobile app, and there was zero approval process. So, if you had winning bettors or losing bettors, anybody in the world on the mobile app was able to place a $110,000 wager to win 100,000, on either the Warriors or the Celtics on the side. And that that wager went through with zero approval process instantly. So I would say we don't have a ton of runners who sit in our book because most of them are on the app, and they're able to bet things instantly with the same limits that they would get at the counter. So for us, like I said, volume, volume, volume. It makes sense for us to have the same limits at the counter as on the app. Obviously, if somebody wants to come to the counter and ask for more than 100,000, on the NBA final side, they're more than welcome to do so.
Got it. All right. Last question we have is from Benny. I think Benny's looking for a job here, Jeff. He says, what is the number one skill set that Jeff looks for when hiring in this industry? I don't even know if you're in charge of hiring or anything like that, but what is the number one skill set that you think people should have if they're trying to get into the industry?
Yeah, I do all our hiring for front of house. I would say if what I look for in terms of hiring front of house is having a good attitude, an ability to eloquently communicate, and having what I would deem a good approach to customer service. So for me, when somebody applies for a ticket writer or a ticket writer position, I don't care whether they've ever written tickets before or not. I want them to come in, have a good attitude, be able to service our patrons at a high level, and really care about the job they're doing. And I would say, a lot of times, you probably run into this yourself, where when you walk into a sports book, you walk up to a ticket writer, they can't communicate, they're not helpful, they have a poor attitude, and they act like you're bothering them, ultimately when their job is to help service you and answer your questions and things like that. So for me, customer service is number one when I'm looking for what I'm hiring in front of house. Having a good attitude, being able to communicate a high level, I would say, are certainly some of the things I look for. And then obviously, for your listeners, who are interested in risk-based positions in the back of house, obviously, Matt Metcalf, who's our sportsbook director, and Chris Bennett, who's our director of risk, they really do the hiring back there. But I would say, having a certain level of focus and an attention to detail are going to be, two of the things they look for. You can enjoy watching sports as much as possible, but if you can't go back into a risk room and be able to separate, your fandom, from being able to focus, being able to really pay attention, to watch the bet ticker, to watch the screen, and to understand things that are going on. I would say, that those are the things that they really look for back there.
All right. Perfect. This was awesome, Jeff. I will be seeing you in the prop streets this fall for a head-to-head duel. I'm looking forward to it. Tell the people where they can find you on Twitter and anything else you want to say or plug here.
Absolutely. The only other NFL thing related to what we're doing here at Circus Sports, I just wanted to pump for your listeners would be the Circus Sports Million and the Circus Sports Survivor. Those are the two football contests we're doing this year. The Circus Sports Million is going to be a pick'em contest against the spread, 5 picks each week, and there's a guaranteed $6 million in the prize pool. And then conversely, on the other side, Circus Survivor. It's a traditional survivor contest in which you pick one team to win each week, and then you can no longer use that team again for the rest of the season. That's also a guaranteed $6 million in that prize pool. You'd have to come out to Vegas, register in person. If you live out of state, you're more than welcome to sign up with a proxy to put in your picks each week. I would say that's really the only other thing Circus Sports related I wanted to pump. You can find me at Jeffrey Benson 12 on Twitter. Very active and outspoken on things that are going on in the industry and things like that. People are more than welcome to DM me and ask me questions about limits, what markets we're going to have, etc. And then obviously, if you want to follow at Circus Sports, that's our corporate Twitter handle. They do a fantastic job in terms of, promoting what markets we're putting out and what things we have going on the book on a daily basis.
Yeah, I love those two contests. I actually think those are going to get way, way, way bigger, and we're looking to get more into the data and strategy behind all that stuff for sure. Because I've played it a lot. Obviously the Westgate Super Contest version of it, and it's fun, man. I mean, it's just I don't really think I have an edge, but man, it's fun for sure to do contests.
Well,
like
yeah,
that.
and for your DFS people, there's no rake. It's 100% payback to the player. I would say that's really, the promo that we put out there. So if you want to get into two contests that have zero rake, 100% payback to the player, I would say these are the two of the best football contests in the business.
Oh, baby, you're talking to the grinders here. No rake is music to our ears. That's perfect. Okay, Jeff, that was awesome. So thankful for you coming on. We will be seeing you in the fall here in Colorado. Obviously, if you're in Illinois, hopefully Iowa or Nevada, you can try to beat Jeff as well. Although if Jeff starts beating me, I just might shutter my account. So it'll be all good. For Jeff, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.